the idea of racial justice work is like a very comfortable space for the Jewish community because we have a history of it. There is, but there is actually related but separate work that also has to be done, in my opinion, around racial consciousness. And I think that it is not, I'll just take it one step further and say that I don't think it is just about how other people see, for lack of a better term, white Jews, but is actually how white Jews are actually also, everything is contextual. So the idea of going out into a space and having having actually a white lens through which is of course, as social lenses are, they are constructs, but they are still inform our realities and inform the way we see the world, but that we're going out and seeing what we're seeing as normal. Like, I think it really just comes back to this idea of what is normal and understanding that, in fact, many times that is informed, especially in the American context, and it differs in various spaces, but obviously we have colorism and racial issues globally speaking. The United States has obviously a particular history here in which we are all seeing it all the time. I'm working on a project right now about the generation of biracial people after the Loving versus Virginia decision, so people who have one white and one black parent. And it's really interesting. So it's people who were born from 1965 to 1985. And it's a short series of short documentaries for an online platform. And it's really interesting listening to these kids. Well, they're not kids now, they're my age, but the people who are kids in the 70s and 80s talking about the images that they saw or didn't see of themselves or what blackness was on television, and how even in fact because one of the things it's so interesting I think about this group of people of which I am a part of is that we very much like kind of lived on this color line where we had one white parent, had one black parent, but we're trying to figure out where we fit into and what were the different messages we were given about why, in a sense, white was quote unquote good and black was quote unquote bad. And the reality is those of us who are part of that generation, those of us who are white, those of us who are black, we are all getting that feed. We're all getting that information, and so I think we have to get to a place where we can have that conversation, and it's not just about pointing fingers, but we can really have that conversation in a very honest way that we have been fed historically through the media and reinforced all the time images of blackness and whiteness that continues. And when, as a person of color who walks out into this world, you're dealing with it all the time, and you're also dealing with what people would consider the positive things. And honestly, in the Jewish space, I think that is quite common to be, whether or not you're told that you're articulate or that, I frequently, I think in a way that I really appreciate when I share my film all around the world, I get a lot of people who share their own personal stories, and a lot of times it's about their one black friend, or something of that sort. So I think it's really this idea of, I think it's in particular when you're looking at, a lot of times it's not just political, but when you're looking at white liberal communities, of which many of us operate within, the idea of why there is still actual racial segregation within these communities, whether or not they are schools or religious institutions or neighborhoods or your jobs, really asking yourself, even if you were down for the cause, do you live in a space where there are no people of color? And why is that? We know that there are historical reasons. Some of us maybe need more of an education, but how do we reinforce that all the time? And education is a huge, huge part of that. I was just reading something this morning about somebody who I know who had written an article about how they'd grown up in segregated schools, and then the schools integrated, and then all the white people sent their kids to private school. Mm-hmm. And so obviously for those of us who live, I don't live in an urban environment, but who live in these spaces, it is just reinforced all the time, and it's happening all around us. And then we go into this space, a lot of times I think for Jews, who sometimes we can also feel like we are minorities in spaces. And so we go into our synagogue and we're happy to be around people who are like us. We're happy to be around community centers. And so when there's somebody else, a lot of times we're actually even happy that person is there, but they're different. And there's a curiosity. And they're an exception. And in certain ways they're exotic or whatever it is. So how are we actually pushing ourselves to actually change those norms externally, but also internally about what we think is normal to be Jewish? And that is, listen, I had to do that work myself. So when I say all of that, I am not, I never am pointing the fingers. I am saying that as somebody who myself had to push myself to expand my idea of when I look around this room, who is Jewish and who isn't and why not.